Hey, yo, it's me, Pops Van Marmalade, and you're watching the Comics-Related Madness Network. Huh? So come get some. CromCon. CromCon.
Your favorite podcast, it's Critical Blast.
Hi, this is Tim TK, host of That Silverline Show on Tuesday. Join us at 11 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Pacific every Tuesday night as we discuss pop culture and the joys of making comics.
And I'm Scott Wakefield, host of Silverline's Wednesday Wham, where we talk about comic books and all kinds of great storytelling, sometimes with incredible guests. And we want you to join us Wednesday nights from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you there.
I'm Roland Mann, and I host Silverline's Silver Sunday. Join me every Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern as we make mine Silverline.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Silverline's Wednesday Night Wham! Hosted by me, I think. Probably Dean, too. A couple of us. Scott is not here tonight, so we are making do. And we will be talking tonight about graphic novels versus comics, actual definitional differences, concept, production, creation, and perceived differences, kind of whatever jumps to our minds. We have a few samples we all rushed out to grab. Brent did a 5-minute, did a 5-mile dash to grab his. Yep.
I need to burn the calorie.
So we are going to get started with some introductions real quick, and we'll talk about our sponsors a little bit, what we have going on in the company, and then we will get into the subject. So we'll start off with Dean. Tell us who you are, what you do, and where people can find you briefly on internet as well as physically.
I am Dean Zachary. I'm a penciler primarily. I work for Silverline, working on a project now called Silverblade. You can find me at Comic Vine, Facebook, and Kickstarter under Dean Zachary and Dean Zachary Art. And that's about it. Easy to find.
All right. And where are you located physically wise?
Physically, I am just south of the Missouri border in the beautiful natural state of Arkansas. Some call Arkansas, but it's really Arkansas.
Yes. And Brent, why don't you go?
I'm Brent Larson. I am the creator and writer of the Silverline book Kalis, which is, I just recently approved the inks for the complete issue 4. Colors are almost done. It's looking really good. Also, I'm the creator-writer of the upcoming Silverline book, Cape Town, which I'm also pretty excited about. That'll be a lot of fun. You can find me on the Instas under brent.vector and also at brenttlarson.com. That's my website, which I need to update sometime soon. And I am in Orlando, Florida. I don't go anywhere very often unless I'm having an out-of-body experience.
So I got to astrally project. All right, Haley.
All right, I'm Haley Martin. I make a webcomic called Heroic Shenanigans, which you can find on heroicshenanigans.com and also on Webtoons. And I'm also doing the art for an upcoming Silverline title called Bear, and I'm also in Florida.
All right. I am Tim TK. I am the associate editor at Silverline and writer-creator of Wolf Hunter, an upcoming World War II espionage action style comic. You can find me pretty much everywhere that isn't the Silverline website at Tim TK Writer. And I am over in Oregon, where we now finally have daylight while we produce this. So it is very nice.
Sure, you could do it.
Yep. Alrighty. So, first and foremost, we're going to talk about our sponsor tonight and most nights, Daytona Beach Comic Con. Daytona Beach Comic Con, they have a website, which is just that, and they are, I believe, still scheduled to happen this fall. Let me see if they have dates up. It will be September 18th and 19th of this year. In a new venue. It's going to be the Tommy Lawrence Arena at the Volusia County Fairgrounds. And you can find that, more details, ticket reservations, and everything at DaytonaBeachComicCon.com. And we also have a Kickstarter going on, and I'm not sure if we're supposed to play that video now or around our intermission. We may discover ourselves an external intermission with both the Kickstarter video and the review back to back. So I think that sounds good, and we will jump into tonight's subject, which is comics versus graphic novels. And we're gonna start real quick with the Webster's, or I guess in this case, Wikipedia definition of comics and graphic novels to see what their differences therein lie, and then talk about our experiences in creating the two, what you might perceive the differences to be as a consumer, maybe even differences in marketing, if that might be interesting, even though I don't think any of our marketing people are on, but as a comic creator, you're also a marketer because it's expensive and no one wants to pay for it.
Yeah.
So, comics is a medium used to express ideas with images, often combined with text and other visual information. It typically takes the form of a sequence of panels of images. Textual devices such as speech balloons, captions, and onomatopoeia can indicate dialogue, narration, and sound effects and other information. The size and arrangement of panels contribute to narrative pacing. Cartooning and other forms of illustration are the most common image-making means in comics. Comic forms include comic strips, editorial, gag cartoons, and comic books. Since the late 20th century, bound volumes such as graphic novels, comic albums, manga have become increasingly common, and webcomics have proliferated in the late 21st century. Graphic novels has a much briefer definition. Graphic novel is a book made up of comic content. Although the word novel normally refers to a long of fictional works, the term graphic novel is applied broadly and includes fiction and nonfiction and anthologized work, at least in the United States, distinguished from the term comic book, which is generally used for comic periodicals. Graphic novel coined in 1964 in England, apparently. So there you go.
Well, I'd like to throw this in as well. I don't know. This is also off the internet. Comic Noun, chiefly North American, a magazine that presents a serialized story in the form of a comic strip, typically featuring the adventures of a superhero. A lot of the listeners may or may not know that comic books in the form of the floppy, which is slang for the shorter, soft cover, 24 to 30 page item magazine that you find in the stores monthly, is an indigenous American art form on the same level as jazz. We invented the comic book as it exists, which I think is kind of cool. Yeah. It's an American thing, you know. A lot of people aren't aware of that it is an indigenous American art form, and it grew out of that short form floppy. And that brings me to this too. I'd love to get you guys' take on the short form versus a long form. I mentioned this a little bit before we went live to Brent, that one of the interesting things about discovering comic books in the late 20th century was you would find the typical serialized chapter, shall we say, of a larger story, but then you would also find occasionally a complete story in one comic. And I don't even know if that's done anymore. Any thoughts on that, guys?
Yeah, I mean, I remember some of the first things that I got when I was getting into it were typically about what some might have known as one shots. It's an entire like self-contained story in that 24 pages.
Mhm.
And being a kid with the attention span of a goldfish, that was probably the easiest way for my parents to give me something that's really quick read, but as a complete story. Compared to now the stuff I'm reading, where your story arcs are going to be a year, maybe 2 years long.
Well, especially if it's X-Men, right? I remember
Yeah.
being so intimidated by walking up to the X-Men because I love the book, and this was in the era long ago of like Chris Claremont writing it, of course, and so it'd be late 80s, early 90s, and you would walk up and grab an X-Men up and you'd be like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And who are these characters again?
Yeah.
You know, and so these long, epics spanned, 24 issues, 12 issues, or what have you. And that seemed to evolve into more contained story arcs, which are what, 4 to 6?
Yeah, 4 to
issues?
6, and usually what I see now typically is you get your 4 to 6 issue main arc, but it all contributes to a grander arc in some way. So it's kind of planting the seeds as you go along, as you might do with like a role playing game or something. Where you have to complete this quest. Okay, here's a little nugget we're going to feedback on later. And they've also gotten a lot better about putting little blurbs at the front of each issue, like here's what you may have missed in issues 1 through 3.
Recap, the inevitable recap.
Yeah,
right.
But
which actually now takes an entire page of what would normally be storytelling. So I'm like, somebody's getting away with something there.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Well, and you guys probably remember from I was a Marvel guy in my teen years and whatever, and they'd have most titles would have an annual, and the annual was self-contained.
Yeah,
that would be a way that you could read a story about your favorite hero without having to know what was going on. But what's funny is I didn't like self-contained stories. I didn't like one-shots. I liked the idea that I was jumping on a story that I would have to wait to see what happened. Frankly, I think it taught me patience as an adult. Probably more than a lot of my friends, just because the idea was, this is that good, it's worth the wait. And so one shots, I'm trying to think of one shots that really, like, there were some pretty cool ones. I remember Chris Claremont, the one where Rogue stole Ms. Marvel's powers. Remember that one? And I remember that story really well, and it was very self-contained, and it had a story that had weight and drama and everything. But I also felt like, by and large, the annuals were just a way to burn off some story that no one really cared about, but maybe they could get a rookie to draw and make some extra money on the side. I don't know what Marvel was thinking, but they never really seemed as substantial as the regular series.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe that painted one shots in a bad light for me or something.
Because I never really got too into annuals as I developed my comic addiction habit. But I would pick up the mega size ones whenever I could. It's like, oh, this one's now 32 pages instead of your normal 24. And those ones were usually also a bit more self-contained. I have one actually where they fight Dracula, which is always a fun time whenever Dracula comes into the X-Men.
Oh yeah.
But those ones I feel like they give a little more space to breathe. But I did as I became more addicted to the art form. I do also prefer kind of the landscaping story to some extent, mostly because there is a lot of emotional buildup, and then if it's done well, if the story is written well, and you get that catharsis at the resolution, it's just an event that's been part of your life for 2 years. It's
right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Time invested. Haley, what about you? Any memorable ones that hooked you in, or were they the short form or the long form, and why?
Yeah, like I probably more like I definitely like the more long form stories. Like I can't think of any really like one-offs, like graphic novel series, and like even with thinking about like movies versus TV shows, like I feel like I get more invested in TV shows where it's like multiple seasons rather than just like a one-off movie. Like I wanna like get invested and see like more things happen, more character development, that kind of thing.
So you would say that you would be initially more likely to pick up a long form graphic novel rather than a floppy. Is that
Yeah.
fair? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. From a creator's point of view, you know, and having worked on mostly story arcs that are either 4 to 6, so that it's inevitably collected. But when you get in the creator's chair, you're thinking, okay, what are my story beats? You know, if it's going to be 4 issues, you know, where's the story going to peak and the falling action, and then where am I going to have, you know, the epilogue and all this stuff, and all the structural issues that you think about. If, you know, most of us have read Campbell, and so we know about the hero's journey sort of template, and, you know, nobody sticks to that just religiously, but certainly it influences us. What do you guys feel about following templates like that, or just throwing it all out and just following your instincts? How do you guys feel about that?
There was I mean, it's the rule that they teach you every time you step into a new class in part of your BFA or MFA, which is understand the rules so we know when to break them.
Right.
And so I always try to start out with either that template or the oh man, who was that? Was that Max Landis or
was it a screenwriter or comic writer?
It was both. But
okay.
he had worked on both, but he had described it as every story has 3 things happen. And then you just have to find the 3 things that connect those 3 things, and then find 3 more things between those 3 things. And so, and that builds into the hero's journey. You have the inciting incident, the center point, which is either the hero finds I forgot the actual name of the thing, but they find the artifact or it's the false victory, and then you have the actual climax of the story. And then you can change it to the third point for also the hero's major defeat that leads into the climax. So it's either a false high point or a really low point, depending on if you're doing a more action adventure type thing or more of a darker
thriller or horror piece,
horror,
or...
tragedy. There you go. Tragedy. Yes.
Yeah.
And I use that as my starting point always, and then as I continue to, I'm a huge outliner too, so having those guidelines helps. And as I continue on, I'll find moments where either it makes more sense to break one little piece of the rules somewhere else, or when talking to the editor, they'll come up with that idea of like, hey, what if we actually flip this or change this a little bit and we'll end up breaking the rules in some way, but because we had that foundation set in the rules, it's done in a way that serves the story.
Yeah, that's good. Haley, what about you? Structure or fly by the seat of the pants? How do you like to write?
Oh, yeah, I feel like I want to be structured, but I just like get too overwhelmed and kind of, because like my Heroic Shenanigans, my comic that I do, like, I mean, I started it like 5-6 years ago, and it's probably where I'm going now with it has changed from when I first started it. And like I have like big events in mind, and then like I do kind of need to fill in like those in between things sort of. But yeah, I'm really bad at thinking about like, oh, here's like this rising action, or think of it in like those kind of terms. But I think like probably our brains like are wired to think of stories that way. And like if somebody, like, you don't want to get too cliche and predictable, but I think if a story is like, if somebody tries too hard to break the rules, I think it's not gonna be like as satisfying of a story, or people feel kind of like, what what was that? Like, what was the point of that? Or it'll just seem something will seem off,
Yeah.
even if they
Yes.
Yeah.
pinpoint it.
Yes. I think you're touching on something that I rant about often, and I won't stay on it too long, and that is the calculation factor. If it feels too calculated, people sense that even subconsciously, and they reject it. They're like, that's too, that's too pat, or that's too expected. And so if you try too hard to be unexpected, that can be a problem as well. Brent, what about you?
Outliner versus pantser.
Yeah.
I'm an outliner all the way. Like I cut my teeth on this more screenwriting. That's kind of my entryway into all of this. And I've read Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, which is a really interesting book, and it's really easy to read, to look at story structure. It basically boils down hero's journey and into some very noticeable beats. And the point, what's funny is he's passed away since, but he not only takes this it's kind of a formula, but not only does he apply it to movies that have come out, but he's applied it to movies that came out 50 years ago. It's almost like there's an intuitive sense of what works for film, where if you deviate even just a little bit, you have to really understand why you're doing it, and be able to jive with your audience to be able to make sure they're still willing to stick with you. Because a lot of people who write for film, or who want to write for film, also don't want to be put in a box, and are very willing to break the formula, and then don't understand why their stories are boring, or their beats come from out of nowhere and are meaningless. And so I really believe in outlining. I'll admit I have to then go back and make sure that I haven't told something that's boring by virtue of being rote, or too seamless. But the nice thing about outlining, I'll say this, is if you're willing to rewrite, which you kind of have to be if you're going to be a writer in any medium, then your outline allows you to make changes and still keep a semblance of the story that you wanted to tell. Because if you don't have an outline, you change anything. It's like trying to cut Jello with a knife. You know what I mean? It's what you have is, I mean, in a way, you really didn't know what you had to begin with. So starting to change it is, it usually just ends up being tweaked to death by virtue of you're trying to fix something, but you're not really sure what's broken. And I've had that experience. So it's not fun.
I will say, for those watching, we all have different opinions on everything. And so there's... Brent and I are not saying that you cannot pants, and Haley and Dean are not saying that you can't outline, because there are extremes on both ends, and that's when it gets a little wonky. But you're going to find your own style and how you make things, and that's where you kind of find your jive. Because if Dean and I tried to write the same story the same way, it's not going to work out.
No,
we're two different people.
I'm under the impression Stephen King is a pantser, I believe.
He's a pantser.
He just says, I start building my characters and I'll take them wherever they take me, kind of thing. Which, good for him. I could never do it. It would drive me insane. So,
well, it's interesting because I write a lot, like I draw. So I start with a small thumbnail where I look at the whole piece, and then a little bit larger, and I look at the whole piece before I sit down and start drawing the hyper detail, right? And so I feel like I approach writing instinctively the same way. I've got to know how it starts, how it ends, right? And then I have to know really what's going to happen in Act 2, to really mess everything up that we have to repair in Act 3. So, and I was going to ask Brent, as a screenwriter, when you sit down to do a long, rambling comic that's going to go 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 issues, however long your story arc is going to be, how do you get your mindset out of the 100-page, 100-minute structured, act 1, act 2, act 3 format? How do you manage that? That'd be interesting to hear, I think.
Well, I am kind of a novice to this, so if anyone wants to weigh in and say BS, hey, you win already.
Also, we
okay?
are
But-
joined by Wubba Fett here, so
Hey, Wubba.
we'll let Brent continue while Wubba gets his audio figured out.
Right. And I'll tell you what I did with Kalis, because with Kalis, when I first started writing it, I knew basically what my basic story was, or my basic idea was. And I knew how it ended. And I was like, dude, I have so many stories I can tell of this guy, where he's been, where he's going, what he's doing now, what he has to do to get back. I bet you I could do 60, 70 issues. And then we started doing the Kickstarter, and I factored it out. I would be in my 70s if I actually continued with that. So I was like, I'm not sure that's going to work. So what I did then was I thought, okay, and Roland really pushes the 4-issue arc, which makes sense because, that's the smallest you can get into a trade, which is then easiest to sell. So what I basically did was I still kept the end and I still had the beginning, but then how I got to the end, I basically broke down into, right now I have it at 17 issues. So I might have to redo that again if something goes awry between here and there. But what I did then was basically figured out, okay, 4 issues, a story arc, that would be 4 story arcs, plus maybe an epilogue. How would I get to the end? What are the events that would have to change? Would I still be able to introduce all the characters that I want? But what would absolutely have to happen to these people in order to get them to the end? And how are they going to change the way I want them to change? And from there, I really just started feeling out, and also I would factor in things like, okay, we can't, he crash landed in Arizona. If we're still in Arizona by issue 7 or 8, that means I've officially run out of ideas. So let's start thinking of different places I want to take these people. And then you also really start doing some free form, like, there's one scene in particular that I cannot wait to get to. It's going to be so fun to show audiences. It's going to be probably, I want to say, in the 4th arc, beginning the 4th arc. So that is going to be in the story. There's a particular panel that I think everyone would really think would be cool. I can't wait to show everybody that. So I'm also thinking not just in numbers of issues and arcs, but I'm also thinking in still images. And what is it that I really think are people that's going to, hopefully it'll blow their minds. It blows my mind when I think about it. So I kind of take all of that together and I put it, you can kind of see here, I've got all these Post-it notes, and I kind of work well with the Post-it notes. I write them down, I kind of assemble them, and I kind of just look at them. And then they all just start to coalesce into something that makes sense for me. And then I just start writing them an issue at a time. What's funny is the first arc of Kalis was 5 issues. And I had an entire issue that will never see the light of day that I had to scrap, and a backstory from Scott's spy days that I'm like, how can I get that story? And it was so cool. But it didn't serve the story. It wasn't going to serve the whole thing. And as a result, I had to get rid of it. And the fact that I was outlining it made it easier for me to do that.
And
So,
Cool.
we'll get, I'll do a brief aside quoting Rick Remender, because it's exactly kind of what Brent talked about that last end there, and it's something that I kind of believe in, and then we'll have Wubba introduce himself. So Rick Remender tweeted this out a couple of weeks ago, and as I was finishing up issue 3 of Wolf Hunter, and it helped me internalize some of my own thought processes and kind of fix that. he was talking about how you outline your comic or your comic run, and he said overplan and then cut out a huge chunk of it. Give the parts that need to breathe that room to breathe, but the rest of it will be so much tighter. And so, we're thinking about that. There, when I wrote issue 3 of Wolf Hunter, I originally wrote my first draft was 26 pages, knowing I was only going to end with 22. So then I had 4 that I knew I had to scrap, and I knew which ones I needed to cut to make it tighter, and which ones I needed to cut to give room for other scenes to breathe. And so that helped a lot. And so I'll let Wubba introduce himself, who you are, what you do, where people can find you, last 4 of your social.
Blood of my firstborn child too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Boba Fett, I am the penciler on the upcoming Cat and Mouse that will be starting after this miniseries ends. And you can find me on Instagram, Wubba F21, I think it is. You can't miss it though. It's got my little W signature. And yeah, other than that, I ain't got no other socials right now.
Sure. All right,
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us. Normally a regular on the Sunday crew, but
Yeah. Crash, you guys. Give me a little love.
yeah, absolutely. We appreciate it.
Actually, I got funny, not funny, I guess. I actually got sent home from work tonight because of the whole COVID spook thing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So my daughter had a little bit of an itchy throat. So the school sent her home, and we're having a conversation, the little group of guys I hang out with at work, and someone decided to tell my super, and they're like, well, if your daughter's home with it and you need to be home with it, I'm like, she doesn't have it. So I'm coming home having to do the hour test, whatever they have now.
Right.
All that thing is painful.
Oh man.
But yeah, so I get to crash you guys tonight.
Perfect.
Glad to have you, man.
Yeah. So as you kind of heard, we're talking comic structure as part of the broader conversation of comics versus graphic novels, and right now we're kind of just landed naturally on the structure of the floppy.
Yeah, if I may jump in, it's interesting, Brent, you might find this weird or curious, but I write the 4-issue arc like a screenplay format. So 25 minutes, 25 pages. So 100 is 100 minutes for me, right? So, and I know I'm going to trim each 25 down to 22. So I write it as like a 100-minute movie and then pare it down. And when I read most of the standard books on screenwriting and so on, but one of my favorite writers, because I do action adventure stuff, is Lawrence Kasdan. And I really try to learn pacing. The hardest thing, the most challenging thing for me is pacing in that 22 to 25 pages, because you got to get to almost each comic floppy is a mini movie for me, right? So it's like, even though you're still kind of locked into the act 1, act 2, act 3 of the overview, I always feel like, well, you gotta give them a little mini adventure and a little mini version of the rising action, peak, falling action, and then the inevitable cliffhanger for issues 1, 2, 3. Do you guys feel that sort of structure call as well?
Yeah. I'm a fan of the phrase treat each comic like it's a reader's first. Yeah. And I'm not a big fan of the exposition dump that some people put in because of that, but treating, like, if someone were to pick up issue 2 without reading issue 1, would it be like a complete movie? Would it be like if they're jumping into Two Towers after then Lord of the Rings without watching the Fellowship? There's a full movie there. There's setup, build up, everything like that. They might miss a few details building up to that from the Fellowship, but they'd still be able to enjoy the full experience because it has a full arc.
Yeah. Good call.
I think Roland's mentioned it, but if you look at like the 70s Marvel books, early 80s Marvel books. I mean, they were kind of like over explained in the beginning, so that the reader was already caught up and could just go right into it,
Yeah.
And then that's what made them fun to read. You
Yeah.
didn't have, I mean, even though you have that collector mentality and you want to buy every issue if you're a fan, you didn't have to with Spider-Man or X-Men or whatever. You could pick it up and know exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
Do you guys write recaps in your 2, 3, 4? Because I always feel like I should do that inside front cover or, first credit page blurb or something, catching everyone up. And how detailed do you guys like to get with the recap?
I actually, like I said, I'm a rookie, but I had this fun idea, which was, since Kalis is like a government conspiracy book with all this going on, I wrote a paragraph that summed the whole 4 issues up, and then I blocked out text for the parts that hadn't happened yet. So for issue 2, it looks like a redacted document for everything except what happened in issue 1, and in issue 3, I'm going to do the same for what happened in issue 2. So there's, I guess, yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's cool.
And it's fun because, in a way, you can be creative with just about every aspect of the book if you want to. I mean, to tell you the truth, Marvel does recaps for all their books, and I read it just because I'm like, I paid for this thing. I'm going to read everything about it, even if I just read the issue before. I don't know. I'm weird that way. But I do actually appreciate that they do that now. Because otherwise you have to catch the reader up using exposition like you were talking about, Tim, and it just looks and feels clumsy.
Yeah,
it does. I hate trying to do that.
It's like I love Claremont, but I really got into X-Men with Load Bell once I had already started putting in the inner front cover as the expo page. So, but when I tell my friends like, okay, here's these Claremont arcs you need to read, I'm like, be prepared for like your first 5 pages to be all captions.
yeah. And
that
those,
was the charm of Claremont, though.
You remember those group shots though, where they have the label of every hero in the book, and then later it got to be not just their name but like their powers. Right.
Yeah.
Iceman, freezing powers, and you're like, okay.
And then we got the meme page where it's the over explanation of Cyclops' eyes. It's like kinetic beams from a portal to another dimension that engage when his eyes open, can only be contained by ruby quartz. Like, this is this entire panel.
Yeah. Right. Like, he shoots beams.
Yeah, that's all you need to know. And like, and then don't even try to explain Psylocke, right? And it's like, it's like, okay, you could go back into, actually, this character was originally in another body, but then she was switched to this ninja body because of this character. And it's like, no, just, psychic ninja. There you go.
I think Claremont actually made fun of himself with that.
He did, after a while.
With the X-Men thing, and because he had Beast going, this is Psylocke, our British way of Japanese assassin mind control.
Yeah. But what's funny, and this is kind of the thing I like about comics, but could also signal its weaknesses. They don't do that as much anymore because they know the audience is sticking with them.
Yeah.
They'll give you a recap so that, because, the last book came out a month ago. It may not be on the tip of your brain, but you know who Cyclops is now. You know who Cyclops is. You don't have to have anyone explain that to you.
Yeah.
So they're not going to explain it to you. And maybe that's because they know they already have you. You are a reader. Are they trying to get new readers? Frankly, the industry indicates they don't know how to do it. And
so we make movies that gets people into reading.
Yeah. So maybe they're hoping like, well, who's this guy? Well, I can check the Googles. And that would probably be really all you need. But a lot of the especially the mainstream comic industry is focused on a guy like me. I grew up on comics. I love them. I'm an adult, but I still read them. I have somehow reconciled this weird aspect of myself.
Yes.
And I'm not going to stop. But what about but I'm about to age out. I'm not going to die anytime soon, but I will eventually.
Right.
And who's going to take my place? All these kids who Marvel and DC, they don't really know how to grab.
So I can talk on two things about that, Brett. One of them will be a segue into graphic novels, which we'll get into after our break. So the two things I kind of talked about this on a earlier show of Unexplained when we covered House of M, and we didn't just talk about how House of M changed the tone of Marvel, but also how it changed the publishing principle. When you look at because the 9-8 reboot, Marvel has already learned that, like, okay, we're clearly we're not doing something right here, so we need a reboot. They tried a bunch of things. House of M lands, it sticks, it blows up, and then from that point on, we end up seeing. Right at that point, you had Uncanny X-Men issues 1 through Kingdom Come, all the way from the Dawn of Time until the reboot. Now you see every 3 years or so, you get Uncanny X-Men issue number 1. And
it's a constant, steady stream of number ones now.
Yeah, so because they want people to, if you're someone walking into a comic store for your first time, and you're like, but this is like issue number 500 of Superman, I'm not sure I want to get into that. And like, oh, this is X-Men number 2. It was weird that it's number 2. I thought it'd be going on for forever, but I'm somewhere at the beginning, so I can start there.
Yeah.
Well, there's also, don't forget, it's not just the reboots and the publicity stunt number ones. There's also the adjective number ones.
Yes.
So it's the mighty Thor, the angry Thor, the
Yes.
old Thor, the
King
new
Thor.
chick Thor.
Yes.
There's, there's
Yes.
angry Wolverine from the day before yesterday, number 1. So I mean, but after a while, it diminishes the value.
You get burned out if you're someone who likes the who like, I read the flagship X-Men. I will occasionally pick up a side issue here and there, but I'm mostly just interested in the flagship because that's most of everything in there. But you do end up getting these weird splinters in the niche now, which I think is very interesting, where I've been reading Wolverine Forever. Someone came in when All New Wolverine featuring X-23 debuted at issue number 1, while Wolverine is already issue 12. So they just picked up All New Wolverine because they're number 1. And so our definitions of Wolverine are very different, but they're still into it, which I think is kind of cool. But then also, when we talk about not so much introducing characters or exposition so hard in floppies, that could also be with some sales patterns that we've noticed, as detailed in Comicron, and that most things in the comic format are now being sold as graphic novels or trade paperbacks through traditional bookstores as of 2019. The most recent stats show that graphic novels or trades sold 765 million compared to floppies 355 million. Through traditional bookstores, 570 to 525. So if they know that more people are picking up trades or completed collections, they probably don't need to explain as much because people are going straight from issue 1 to issue 2.
Yeah.
Brent and Haley had to depart for the evening, so we will be managing the rest of this cruise. We spent the first hour talking on the traditional comic floppy, the structure, the creative process that went into that, the technical definition difference between a comic floppy and a graphic novel. So in this back half, we're going to talk about graphic novels, what they mean, and maybe some perceptions that differ between consumer and creator.
Yeah, I think Tim touched on a little bit in the previous hour that marketing wise and commercially, graphic novels seem to be the dominant choice of readers right now. And what do you guys think is the reason for that? You think people just want a deeper, richer story, and they figure, well, I can buy these individual issues, or I can just wait for the trade? What do you guys think?
I think it's kind of just the way the culture has become, like with Netflix and everything. They just want everything. They don't want to wait, a month,
Yeah.
just all at once.
Yeah. And I follow. I get my main series that I collect with the intention of chucking at my kids one day as trades now. And that has to do with also my location. I'm in a major metro area, but our local comic book shop does not actually get into releases. They buy collections and trades. Because they're primarily a hobby shop. But I will follow floppies through things like Comixology or whatever if it's a series that I have a friend working on and I want to give them my money immediately, or if it's just something I'm interested in as a side series, but not necessarily my main collection.
Right. So I'd love to get you guys' thoughts on this. When we're talking a graphic novel, we're talking a minimum, let's say, of 88 pages, because you're talking 4 issues of 22, right? So let's say for the sake of the discussion, you got an 88-page graphic novel. Okay, how does that affect tangible hard copy storytelling versus streaming and digital storytelling? Does it affect it at all? What do you guys think?
I think also being a habitual novel reader, I like it because it gives that same sort of experience where I can clear out an afternoon instead of having to have all my pulls that week and go from like different story. I can just sit down with one story for that afternoon and have that be my engagement with the medium, as opposed to, okay, here's 20 minutes of X-Men, great. Here's 20 minutes of curse words, great. Here's 20 minutes of Spawn, great.
Great, yeah. But I'm talking in terms of the physical paper copy versus just
versus
let me
online.
just read this on Comixology or some
I prefer the physical one. Being able to one, it's less harsh on the eyes. But there is something to the sit down experience with it, and really being able to engage with it differently. But the online is also very great if you live in an area where you may not have access to a shop that gets in your weeklies. Also, people who live in very rural areas, that may be the only option they have. Or if you're
what about you?
Nope, Bubba's muted. Let's see.
He's muted.
There.
Muted.
I was muted.
There you go. He's back. He's back.
My nephew was having a tantrum.
Oh, no worries.
Yeah. I'll turn my sound back on in a minute.
Okay, no worries at all. I'm sorry I interrupted you, Tim. My apologies, my friend.
I was gonna say, and then also, if comics dominate a major part of our lifestyle at this point, so also being able to read like on the bus or just waiting in the office or whatever, that's also great.
Yeah. I sense that, and I sense that with your generation too. You're a lot younger than I am. That this prediction, this doomsday prediction that print was dead and going away and everything was going to go away from hard copies and we're all going to just have digital information and all this other, it's absolutely not happened. If you look at magazines and the proliferation of the physical magazine, which I include graphic novels and floppies in that category. What do you think? I mean, do you think that's always going to sort of be in the background, or do you think inevitably we will enter a world where they're not physical copies anymore?
Maybe, but not for a long time. In the same numbers that I pulled earlier for graphic novels versus floppies, the breakdown. So graphic novels were at, and this is all physical sales for the first two. We're at 765 million sold in 2019. Floppies 355 million. Digital comics only did 90 million. Yeah. So I think it's kind of the same thing with what people thought movie was going to do to the novel, what people thought the novel was going to do to the Bard. Which also, if you if you want a really funny experience, look up the public outcry against the novel when it came out.
Okay.
But people thought the
Interesting.
novels were going to kill off the long-standing tradition of oral storytelling.
Right. Right.
But there may come to a point where, like now, where you're more likely to come across a novel rather than a storyteller, but you still have speaking events, you still have everything like that. It's maybe not as common, but you're always going to exist in some sort of hybrid now that both exist. And so it may lean in favor of digital more than print sometime in the far future, but I don't think print's ever going to fully go away.
I agree. There's something about the nature of the art form itself.
Yeah.
It seems more genuine
Mm-hmm.
in its original form. And so that genuine perception then gives more value to it.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I feel like a lot of what digital adds in value right now is mostly people's ability to find stuff that's no longer in print anymore. Because Marvel and DC had their vaults and just scanned all their back issues in, and now you can read those digitally. But if you get in print, I feel like even people who are just now getting into comics off of the MCU, friends' recommendations, whatever, their first instinct is always go to a bookstore or go to a comic shop and find something tangible.
Wubba, are you back with us, my friend?
I am back. Yep.
Good. I wanted to ask you, as an artist, do you prefer? A lot of artists now are moving to digital creation of their graphic novels, and I have an iPad too, and I can go directly digital if I wanted to, but for some reason there's some kind of organic, I don't know what it is, intangible mystery to drawing directly with lead on paper that just is missing for me when I'm working digitally. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I mean, for cat and mouse, I'm doing a lot of it digitally for speed. Because I don't have a lot of time, the day job and doing that. So I need to utilize all the time possible. But I'm still making sure to at least draw out a handful of pages to actually, for the Kickstarters and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, if I had the time, I would just do the whole thing old school. Like the whole thing. I love it. It's relaxing. There's a better quality to the lines. And I can get my cross hatching just right on paper. I'm messing around with it,
Yeah. Do you use a particular app that you like?
Yeah, I'm a Clip Studio fanatic.
Okay.
I love Clip Studio. It behaves about as close as possible on the Wacom to actual paper and pen.
Okay. Interesting. All right. I agree with you on the old school way. I just, my work tends to feel more powerful that way. When it's interpreted digitally, it loses something. Not to take away from the inkers who've worked over me, both physically and digitally. Barb did terrific work over me, and Tommy does his inks, but his inks look like old school, like he's slinging ink. It's amazing what you can do with it. Tim, what about from the writer's perspective, and can you see a difference, or does it even matter to you when you're writing, whether your artist is going to draw it old school on paper or go digital?
I think that would more so come into terms with I don't know if I pay that too much attention. I think I do in some aspects when I think of like subject selection, what project I want to have, what style of artist to work on.
Yeah, it makes sense.
But it also comes to like the same thing of, you wouldn't want someone who only draws hard fantasy to work on your sci-fi hard-boiled detective story.
Yeah.
With something like Wolf Hunter right now, it was more so about the mechanical aspects of what the artist could do, and I think they did a mix of both. But having them
Okay.
work physically also added a lot of grit to it, I thought, because it is ruled to historical fiction, and um, v- vehicles don't play a major part. Well, they do, but they're not too important to the story. But I did realize I ended up creating a form of planes, trains, and automobiles unintentionally.
Mhm.
I, I accidentally created a pastiche. But there's a lot of mechanical parts to it. There's a lot of machine parts, and so the artist we got, AJ Cassetta, his job before this was doing technical manuals for the army.
Oh, perfect.
So drawing engine blocks, drawing mechanical parts. That was kind of his shtick. And so when it comes to that sort of scale and detail, yeah, it's his wheelhouse, and so that works out perfectly. Just that transitioning of, all right, I know that we're going to have a 1938 officer car here. This is the brand and model. I know that AJ knows what that looks like, just kind of off the top of his head. And he knows where to find the references if he needs something else.
Yeah.
And but
Good call.
but I don't feel like it can make too much of a difference if he's doing that physically versus digitally. But I do feel like the physical just adds a little bit of grit to it that it would be
Yeah.
lacking otherwise.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, but we were talking about graphic novels.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring something up. So, I don't know who remembers them. I was a huge fan of them. John Burns, OMAC.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so that technically is a graphic novel series,
Right.
but DC marketed it as Prestige.
Okay. Yeah.
So, how do you feel about that kind of stuff, where it's actually a graphic novel, but it's a series?
I think that kind of it makes sense
It's
because
like both formats.
yeah, but if I remember correctly, there were kind of graphic level length, but when it's the same thing of like a television series versus a movie series. It still works. It may be crafted a little differently, but in terms of is it something you can do as an artist? Absolutely, you could. You can make a painting and then shred it at an auction and still be an artist. You can kind of do whatever you want, but in terms of what works in the market, I think that does, because even now we see the way things are transitioning more towards trades. Not to keep everything on X-Men, just that's my trade that I'm collecting at the moment. I think they transition to now like a 26-page issue that then gets put into a trade, and then everything like that. So they're already kind of moving towards like just make everything a little bit longer, just so it feels when you get the trade paperback, you're sitting down with that, and you're they know that they can get people who want more substantial stuff when they go in to find a trade. That's just a little edge they can put to their marketing.
Yeah.
So I think
that makes sense.
So I think in terms of if it works, I think graphic novel series, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah. Oh, I think it does work. I like the idea of, the graphic novel. It's richer. It's like a Peter Jackson movie. It's a Lord of the Rings epic 2.5-hour movie rather than a 90-minute or 100-minute movie. And so, yeah, I mean, bring it on. If you got the time and the energy to do it, it's better. The other thing graphic novels allow for is you create a lot of depth of character. You can go deep into the story, but you can also go forward and back in time. So if you've told what you want to tell within that time period, then you can do prequel, you can do far future sequel. You can play around with it, and still it's the same title. And again, you've got this area of depth. I honestly don't see the floppy as lasting that much longer. I mean, what do you think it's eventually going to just be graphic novels? Do you think the floppy will go away? What do you think?
I think the floppy is around. It's always going to be around. The reason I think that is because with the Kickstarters and the Indiegogos, there are so many new creators, so many fresh voices coming out through that way. It's not going to die. If there was no Kickstarter or Indiegogo and it was just strictly, DC and Marvel, absolutely, it would croak right out.
Yeah.
But with all the fresh creators constantly coming out and printing, Kablam or Comic Wellspring or any of those places, it's going to be around for a long time.
Yeah,
I agree. I think, and in terms of the marketplace now that's opened up, we're not even limited in a universe now where it's the big two and Image and Dark Horse, which is what, Wubba and I kind of grew up mostly with Marvel and DC. And then it just became like, well, there's Image and Dark Horse now. And that was pretty much it. And then there was IDW, and then there was all these little ones maybe. And now it's just that universe is just expanded and it's such like creating now, starting in the business now should be the most exciting thing for younger creators because it is literally wide open. It's international.
Yeah.
The internet's the greatest invention of all time for comic book creators, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't.
It's near limitless. You can do any kind of color palette you want now. I mean, get away with any kind of story.
Yeah. What I think was it 2019? Yeah. Really kind of saw the blow up of Vault Comics, the startup with the Wassel brothers, and they got their TV show Science Sci-Fi like 1 year after they launched, which is insane to do for a small indie press to immediately have a series big enough that Sci-Fi options it off the get go. But and they were creator source for their first couple things. Like Adrian wrote his thing, his brother wrote his thing, and then they're like, all right guys, just send us your comics and we'll see if we can get an opening lineup, and that's what they did.
Yeah. I mean, this is the time to be creating independent content. And I'll ask you this, Tim, because and Wubba too. Give me your thoughts on the sort of desire to do the big characters. Because as a kid, growing up and reading Marvel and DC, we all had our favorite characters. Man, I've made it if I get a chance to draw Batman, or if you're a writer, I've made it if I get a chance to write X-Men. Guys, share your thoughts on, like if you had a wish list of a graphic novel that you would want to write for an existing IP. First of all, would you even bother? And second of all, what would it be?
If I, if taking someone out back and cutting out their kidney meant I could write a like Scott Summers, Cable, Vulcan, like family team up book, absolutely I would. But I think also having a goal like that is great because but also understanding that is the end destination. Marvel is not going to necessarily pick up someone fresh. They might, but they typically are not going to pick up someone new, and they don't accept submissions. So they would not accept the kidney stained submission for the Steam book. But
right,
my success for me is more or less determined as like, will someone pick up someone's kid in particular pick up my comic book, sit down in the school library, and waste their lunch reading that.
Yeah.
Like while I make some kids' day the way that my day was made by Scott Lobdell and Ed Brubaker, like that'd be my success. But my end goal, if I could, I would absolutely cut that kidney out to make that deal.
And that gives us an insight on Tim's dark secrets. So what about you, Elva? What's success for you in the existing IP and then in the independent world for a graphic novel?
Existing IP, I have particulars. So if it was Marvel, it's Silver Surfer.
Awesome.
But if it was like 2000 AD, or like my big ultimate character I've always wanted to do, Slain.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wow.
Wow.
Because like you were saying, because we're about the same age. So all we had really was Marvel and DC, and you had Dark Horse kind of on the radar a little bit, and the other, but there was still 2000 AD in heavy metal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they were been around for a while. So
And for anyone,
that's how I discovered Corbin and Slain.
Sure.
I mean, all those guys that really influenced me. So Slain's my big one.
yeah.
Okay. All right.
Not to cut anyone, but for those also listening to the VOD later on, the podcast, whatever, or also here on the stream, 2000 AD, I believe, as well as heavy metal, both have open submissions. So if you're a new creator, shoot the moon. Do it.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
Absolutely.
I bug the crap out of Rebellion all the time.
I think for me, I actually achieved childhood dream getting to draw Batman.
Yeah.
So that was awesome.
I didn't know like Batman.
Yeah. No, you never
No, never. I guess I know.
Never heard that. So that was awesome. And but now I think I've reached a stage where I want to go full indie, my own stuff. I think one cool thing I think I'd love to do would be a crossover, which again, never happened. This is so like pie in the sky, but it would be fun. I'd love to do Batman versus Dr. Doom, right? One shot. And I also love to take a shot at Werewolf by Night for Marvel and show them how to make that a successful book. Because for me, I mean, it's just my 2 cents worth. If Marvel hears this, whatever. But my 2 cents worth is Werewolf by Night is actually Wolverine. It's just mystical Wolverine instead of technical.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you write that character like Logan, a tragic hero cursed, right, but with a supernatural curse rather than a technical curse, you could bring back, I think, that romance that we had. Wubba and I grew up with horror comics being as big of a deal as superhero comics. So we had Tomb of Dracula and House of Mystery, and Batman would fight a vampire just as quickly as he'd fight a criminal, because those things were really cool back then. For whatever reason, that's sort of fallen out of popularity, but I would love to take a stab at that. And the nice thing about Dracula is, that's public domain, so anybody can take a stab at that.
Also,
I was gonna say, so on Dean's other question about like gauging success, at more like a personal level. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you a little bit of story about how I got hired into Silverline, besides bugging the crap out of Roland. So when Roland finally gave me the chance, I decided to do what kind of used to do back in the early 90s and stuff for portfolios, where you redraw an artist that you admire and submit it. So I actually redrew you, Dean.
Awesome.
Ferret number 1.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm sorry you had to go through that.
No, I enjoyed every minute of it, because I looked at it and I was like, what's something in here that I can do a little bit better than Dean? Because I was completely for like everything else that you did. It just all looked really good. And I got the stage scene. I just focused like really hard on that stage scene. But when Roland liked that and I was hired, that was a personal success right there.
That's awesome. Thank you for that, man. I would actually love to see those. If you sometimes you want to send those to me, I'd love to see those.
That's awesome.
Okay. That's really awesome, man.
All right. So if we can jump back, we need to talk about craft because we are creators and that's what we like to do.
Yes.
Yes.
Everywhere.
So talking about graphic novels versus floppies, or comics. And the way we kind of talk about collecting trades as opposed to collecting floppies. But I think something that's really interesting that you can do with a graphic novel that you can't do with a traditional comic is you can write to length like you would with a movie.
Yeah.
So like Vandroid, it technically is 5 issues, but they're broken up in 5 chapters of varying length. But it is written to be 120 pages, and that's how it's wrote and then broken down in the chapters from that point on. And I think that's like we were talking about earlier, where if you can do a graphic novel series, that allows you to then write to length, but then still get a series out of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So, Dean, being someone who's been experienced in the industry for so long, if someone were to approach you with a 2-length project like that, how would you necessarily approach that as the artist? What would be your, or would you prefer doing something like that as opposed to doing, we're going to do 6 floppies?
I would look at it the same way I looked at story arcs, the individual comics. I would first content, figure out what the story was about, character designs, but I would literally just start page 1, go for it. The set pieces is the first thing I designed, so I would read the whole story, 120 pages. I'd read the whole thing, and then I would start breaking it down into set pieces and start building reference. So, like for instance, if in Act 3, page 78, you were in a stadium, right? I would start building stadium references, or if you're in the ruins of, say, the Washington Monument or something halfway through, and I would get references for that. And then vehicles, if you had specific vehicles for the characters or weapons for the characters, I would start building the library of references, and then character designs getting approved by the writer, of course, and then start breaking it down with layouts. I think it's important as an artist to make the writer feel comfortable. If I'm working with a writer for the first time on a graphic novel, what I would do is break down everything into thumbnail sketches, pretty detailed. I know you guys, if you ever ask Roland, when I first started working on the Ferret, I would send him thumbnails of every page, but they were pretty tightly drawn thumbnails. I mean, to the point where shadows, costumes were there. It wasn't just roughed out figures. And I did that for first several issues before he felt comfortable enough with me just that they could be looser and he just give an idea. But then when I got my first break at DC, working on Green Lantern, same thing. I gave them really tight, small thumbnails. I didn't want to burn up too much time, but I would do that. I would say, okay, we're going to go 5 pages with thumbnails. I want you to see where I'm going with this, and we'll do all the adjustments at a quarter size thumbnail. Then I'll blow that up. And sometimes they would want to see a tighter, let's say half size, before I blow that up on a light box and do the full size. But my approach would be very much breaking it down into segments of about 5-page increments, doing tight thumbnails and proceeding to tight layouts. But the very first thing I would do is have a long discussion with a writer about the look, the feel of it. Is this a noir thing? Is it a bright and sunny Superman type thing? Is it a dark and gritty, more Batman type thing? Is it a spacefaring X-Men type thing? And then go from there. We talk about style. We talk about lighting. Is it there going to be a lot of shadows in the book? Are there going to be a lot of brighter scenes? And just really get into the technical side of the look and feel. That would be the first step. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much on that answer. I'm sorry.
Very good. All right. What about someone approaches you with the written to length graphic novel? Is there any way you'd approach that differently, or would you approach it the same?
I would approach it the same. When it comes to drawing anything, whether it's from a book or a script or whatever, I'm pretty much the same. I always read it first, and if something is sticking out, like really grabbing my mind eye, I highlight it right off the bat. and then I'll keep going through it, and I'll show one of Roland's scripts that he sent me. You can see all my favorite panels are all highlighted. Yeah. So I mean, other than that, it's pretty much the same process as Dean. Once I get through, then building up the references, and if I have questions, I'll give the writer a call.
Okay. I'd say writing writing is probably where you get the most difference from going from floppy to graphic novel or length project. With floppy, just makes more sense in my mind to do front to back writing kind of linearly, just because you have such a tight space and you want to make sure that the reader's flipping through from pages 1 to 22 at a decent pace. You don't necessarily want to keep them dragging on too long, so you want to make sure that you're ending everything right and all your cliffhangers at the end of each page tie together. And you're doing a lot of micro cliffhangers on each last panel to get them to the end. But with something that's written to length, you don't necessarily need to worry about that as much because they've already bought into the project. You don't necessarily need to worry about next month. And you can assume that they're also in for the long haul. So you write it a little more like a traditional novel. So doing the outline and then whatever is going to be the big scene or what's cutting at my mind that day, I'll write those pages out. And then at the end, when I go through and do the second or third pass, tie them all together and tidy it up, but not necessarily writing linearly, but writing kind of scene by scene, depending on where either is more exciting or is what I have the click in the shower that morning, like, oh, I can change this around and make it a little spicier.
So what about when you're talking about micro cliffhangers and so on, do you find yourself as you're writing long form, you're writing over 100 pages, let's say, is it a challenge for you to break out of I need something to really hook them at 22 and then at 44 and then at 66, or do you just abandon that altogether? I mean,
I try to change mentality. So because you can do the same thing wherever when you're writing prose, you have action chapters and you have breather chapters, essentially. And this is something that I think it was Kevin Hearn talked about on his podcast, as well as Brandon Sanderson on his, where if you have just cliffhanger after cliffhanger after cliffhanger, you're going to give your reader a heart attack. As if they're in there for sitting down for over an hour with your book. So all right, chapter 3 is going to be the inciting incident. So something big needs to happen at the end of chapter 2 to introduce it. But then chapter 4 is the recovery and the journey onto the next step. That's setting up the second point in the story, which is either going back to our hero's journey, grabbing the artifact, the false victory, or the hero being laid low, something like that. So you're going to give them a little bit of a breather where you also get more into character, which is something I find you can probably get away with a little easier in a graphic novel, is taking more time to let characters breathe, as opposed to, you have your 22 pages of comic, you and your artist do, when the editor comes back, you're like, you guys need a bigger fight scene here.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying in terms of that, because usually the genre I'm involved in is action adventure. And what's wonderful about a graphic novel opportunity is I get the chance, like you're phrasing it in terms of letting the character breathe. I like quiet moments.
Yeah.
And I like letting the reader sort of project into the leading character. For instance, if you're writing a Daredevil graphic novel or a character like that, who's so pensive and internally conflicted, having him, like, for instance, sitting in a chapel quietly.
Yeah.
If you're writing a graphic novel, you can have him sit in that chapel for like a whole page.
Yeah.
And even do silent panels, which, you can't really afford to do that as much in the floppy form, the short form, but in a graphic novel form, you can really indulge yourself with quiet panels, silent panels.
There's a graphic novel by Warren Ellis. It's actually an Avenger comic, which is interesting because it's written to graphic novel length. So there's not even chapter breaks in it. It's just straight, you read until the end without any breaks in it. And there is, I think it's called Forever War. something like that. But there's there's a lot of moments where they delve deep into Thor's history and the fact that he's had a long history involved with Earth and how that ties in with Captain America and Iron Man, who view themselves as being Earth's mightiest defenders, and the fact that Thor has technically been doing it longer.
Yeah.
But and there's moments where but Thor has to realize that in that time he's not exactly done his job as best as he can, and there are moments where you get like a full page or whatever of these characters either having a moment where a fight leads into them leaning into each other, and then there's a moment of the steam decompressing as they're silent on a jump jet or something like that.
Yeah.
And you get to allow these characters their full moments to develop in would be 3 to 4 pages, which is about almost a quarter of your floppy, so you wouldn't really be able to get away with that as much in your traditional floppy.
That's a good point. It's an excellent point. I also appreciate writers who are confident enough to not do snappy, chatty dialogue or feel that they need to do that in every scene. Now, some stories lend themselves more to that, but I always find it interesting. I used to say this: not everybody has to be as funny as Peter Parker, who was the comedian of Marvel's mainstream superheroes until Robert Downey Jr. was cast as Iron Man, and then he became the funny character for Marvel. But before then, inarguably, it was Peter Parker was the funny quipster, right?
Yeah.
So and now you could say it's a three-way tie between Robert Downey's version of Iron Man, Deadpool, and Peter Parker, right? But in any case, rather than getting involved, a lot of these writers, I'm not going to use any names here, but they just want to show off how quippy and how comedic their snappy dialogue, and that's fine. But too much spice in the sauce can ruin the sauce, and it's good to have those quiet moments where a writer has the courage to write silent panels of something horrible's just happened, and Thor turns and looks at Iron Man. Iron Man turns and looks at Thor. They both turn and look at Black Widow, and she's crying, and there's a moment, there's a beat, right? And you let it breathe. You let it breathe, and you let the reader feel the impact of whatever tragic event is just happening. Spider-Man just got killed or supposedly killed or what have you. And you allow that to happen, and you don't feel like you have to write dialogue for every scene, or even descriptive dialogue for every scene, because and I want to get your take on this. Do you feel as a writer that you have to write either a description, a caption, or balloon dialogue for every panel, or do you feel like you're not doing your job if you don't?
There is some level of guilt knowing that the artist is going to spend much more time on the script than I am. But I don't necessarily feel like I need to. But almost as a rule of thumb, I kind of like how I will sometimes overplot, knowing that I will cut in order to make sure that I have stuff to cut, and so what remains is the meat of the subject. It's always easier to cut than to write in or add in. So for anyone who's looking to write, make sure you're prepared to cut your darlings and look forward to it. And know that if you're underwrite something, when you get to the point where like, okay, when you add in 2 more pages, you're going to be scratching your head because you don't know what to do. So I always like to overwrite so I can cut down and make it feel tight, and then know that what's been cut then allows stuff to breathe. But as a rule of thumb, I will overwrite dialogue to a point where, not necessarily like try to overpopulate a panel, but just going through, I'm like, okay, here's a caption of something, and as I go through, I'll see like, is this serving something, or is this something I wrote in that will be, I can see where if that moves anywhere else, and it'll leave that panel open. If it truly serves no purpose, and I can just cut it, or if it's something that can then be morphed into something else. So by overriding that, you then also give yourself a lot of options without necessarily putting yourself into a crunch at the back end, where you get to the end and you have an entire page without panels, and you realize like, oh, they should be talking here. Uh, but
Yeah, that's a good point.
but I don't necessarily feel that when it gets to the final letters, there's probably going to be a lot of dialogue that gets cut and some panels left open because of that. Because that either allows the panel before that to breathe or allows the panel after it to ramp up.
Okay.
Okay. But me writing that caption in there gets me thinking about what the caption would lead to in the next panel, or what that caption would resolve in the previous panel. So that might lead me to go back and change something in the previous panel, or to vamp in the next panel. And so even if that caption or bubble gets cut, the tension that it let my mind work on essentially is already ingrained in the rest of the script. It's kind of like the other writer's golden thumb. Write your story and then take a page off your front and a page off your ending, and it's done.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. What about panel count? Most of us artists really appreciate fewer panels because it features the art.
Mm-hmm.
And I find ways around it. If people write more than 5 panels anyway, I'll do some silhouettes and expand some shots. But in general, I don't really like a writer to go above five panels per page. And what's beautiful again about a graphic novel's length is you get this ability to expand the visual scope and do a double page spread.
It's funny you just ask that, because someone in chat, Stilito1 on YouTube says, I published my own comic book back in 2003. Hey, congratulations. It never took off because I didn't know how to market it. I don't think anyone knows how to market it. We just kind of make do with what works. How many panels per page do you think is too many? After reading other guys' work, I'm going to discipline myself to only 5 panels per page, if I even start drawing again. So yeah, a lot of what you see is 5, maybe 6 panels. With Wolf Hunter, we went a little over, but it's then the same style as Department of Truth by Tinian right now, which I don't know if you're reading that at the moment. It's one of the ones I'm collecting as floppy. It's coming out through Image, but it's another kind of a different take on the detective spy story, and so there's a lot of cerebral stuff in it. And the great thing about working in tandem with an artist is you can translate that cerebral into the artwork.
Yes.
And so there'll be moments where we'll go up to maybe 8 panels, but my artist knows that they're going to be he's going to do them as non-traditional panels in some way. So there's one, I don't know if I have a sample of it, but it is really cool. Where you'll see them like panels get featured in weird ways, or it's in actuality one panel and then a bunch of cutouts of that panel, or just small things, but they're not. The main artwork gets featured, and then it's just allowing small things to detail and add to the thought that goes on leading into that main center focus. The Tinian one where it is like a stained glass for the main panel is one thing, and then it turned into stained glass, and he fit the other panels in there. And so allowing the artist to just do their work, and if he says like, I'm not going to do this many panels, like, cool, do what works.
Sir, it's good to have an understanding between the writer and the artist, where the story has to be the defining template for what it has to serve the story, whatever decision is made. And it's important for all the creators listening out there. It's important for a collaboration between a writer and the artist to be close and to be teamwork, where it doesn't become an ego tug of war, because that will destroy a project very quickly. But it's important to say, what's going to serve the story. Doing the 6 panels you've written, or maybe I can do 5, and we can do a really cool silhouette of a figure, and then run the 4 panels along the side of it. Something to really expand on it. I was going to ask you this too, and not just panel count, but when we're talking about a graphic novel, there's room for experimental writing styles.
Yeah.
And we all know about the legendary writers, the Alan Moores, the Grant Morrisons, the people who love to be, even Tom King does this, too clever by half, where I'm gonna write the story chronologically on notepads, and then I'm gonna shuffle all the notepads around, and it's all gonna be, asymmetrical, non-chronological, and then it's all going to somehow come together at the end. And I'm not knocking that. If that's what you like to do, if that's how you want to tell your story, fantastic. You have to be very, very good to pull that off, because as we said earlier,
not everyone's Tom King around more.
right.
Yeah.
You gotta know the rules very well before you break them. When you look at a scope, let's say 120-page story, are you thinking in terms of, what, I'm going to shuffle around the chronological sequence here and make people work a little bit to get through the story? Is that ever something that occurs to you as a writer, or do you want to do like sort of stunts, what I call stunts like that?
I also try to stick away from chronology, just as a rule of thumb. I think that if a flashback can be avoided, it should. Sometimes it's kind of sloppy at times. But I like the idea of maybe messing with the psychology a little bit. Obviously in comics, even though you can do perspective of who's the caption, who's narrating the captions, but the reader's always going to have some sort of omnipotent perspective because they're reading it, and drawing a first-person comic sounds real weird, and not something I would want to attempt writing.
Exactly.
Exactly. But maybe cutting to is something that the character or the reader is seeing really there. So there's one moment in issue 2 of Wolf Hunter where the window cuts away to a flashback behind it, but it's a panel within a panel. It's it's like, we can trick you into letting us do more stuff on this page than we think we can get away with.
Right.
But it's just kind of minor detail in the back, but and we do tricks to make it clear what's happening. Like the window was in sepia tone or whatever. Yeah. Or the idea of like half truths, or like hidden presentation. The story, the trick to every thriller is that the writer just doesn't tell you what's happening until they decide to. Like they'll make it think like the character's picking up nuggets, but really like, all right, I'm just going to inject a clue here. And you can find ways to obfuscate that more and more. And so if you're doing a floppy, you're going to need to unveil at least one thing per issue. Otherwise, people are going to be like, why am I watching a man walk around downtown Detroit for 22 pages?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
But with length, you can get away with, maybe obfuscating things a little more interestingly. Obviously, you still want to give your readers, you want to honor them the way you tell the story, and not lie to them. And well, you can lie to them, but just not, not lie on your promises. So if they know this detective story, there's going to be detective work done, but you have more room to make it a little tricky.
That's a good point. Have you ever tried doing what I call the simultaneous, I would say, analogy writing, where or metaphorical, where what you're seeing is not really what you're saying,
right?
But it's similar. So we see that a lot in Watchmen, where you're talking about something else, but something else is going on that's unrelated, but somehow thematically they're related. So if you had Hannibal, the serial killer, who we all know is a cannibal, right? And he's talking to a law enforcement person, and you're showing a woman cutting up a piece or a chicken to cook it for dinner, right? And so those are seemingly unrelated, but thematically they're the same.
Yes, not to get to too many spoilers, but one of the points that I am still refining more and more as we get closer to lettering, but the main antagonist, of Wolf Hunter is, of course, a German spy. The main character is a counterintelligence officer, so he's the Wolf Hunter.
Awesome.
Yeah, but he's a spy who has a history of having worked in American theater productions, so Shakespeare and stuff. So he's a bit of a Shakespearean, uh, uh,
Fan.
his head stuck up as his own. So the and when you have characters who are in disguise and you're trying to hide the Shakespearean German with other characters in disguise, everyone lies in interesting ways. And so
Okay.
I try to mess around a lot with having people talk about what's going on in something that's not necessarily here or in here that's not here.
Excellent.
And of course, the Shakespearean guy, when he monologues, I'm trying to my best to make it as Shakespearean and fantastic as possible.
Do you quote from Shakespeare at times? Like, do you go to the plays and pull quotes?
After now that I'm finalizing his dialogue, yes. Well, at first I was like, I wanted to develop that idea when I was drafting. I'm like, oh, what if I did this? I'm just like, okay, here's my TK notes. Also, that's the joke of my last name, is it's my initials, and also if you worked in editorial for newspapers, TK means to come or reference later.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. So is Wolf Hunter a graphic novel in scope?
It's a 3-issue floppy, and it's going to be this. I don't know how exactly we're going to package at the end, but it is going to be collected in the end in some way. But we decided only to do a 3-issue run with this, just because it seemed to make the most sense with what we wanted to do with it, and the fact that it is a canned story at times. So you can't have a long form canned comic that looks weird.
Okay.
I'm sure you
Fair
can
enough.
if you're Alan Moore or Tom Keene, but I am not.
Right. Is this? I take it it's a historical spy thriller.
Yeah. It's based off of the Tizard mission in World War II, where Henry Tizard, the one of the research and developers for the United Kingdom, essentially found a way to compress radar into a device called a magnetron, and he created portable radar, something you could load into planes and smaller vessels. Because at the time you only had the towers, and you can fit on massive ships, but you couldn't do anything with smaller boats or with planes. So they loaded that onto a train, and then essentially ran the blockade to get that to America to produce. However, according to the actual story, what happened is Henry Bowen, who was one of the developers and was the one carrying it, he lost it boarding the train at London. And he had to find it. So we're playing around with the secret history of what if that's the declassified version, and the actual thing of what happened is a spy stole it, and then it's planes and trains and automobile meets Murder on the Orient Express in England.
Wow, that's very cool. Very cool. It even has a little flavor of From Russia with Love, because Bond is hunting a device, right? It's got that feel to it. It's Cold War, rather than World War II. But yeah, it's very, very cool story. I like that. I like that. What when you look at a brand new concept and you say, okay, I want to do this as a long form piece. When you write it out as an outline, because you were saying you do outlines, do you know how it's going to end as you start the beginning, or does that take a while to grow and become something solid?
That depends on how tricky it is.
Okay.
With Wolf Hunter, the exact end I did not know, but because originally it was an idea that I had and I scrapped, but then years down the road, I had an idea of how it would end, and then that's when I finished the pitch and sent it off. But with another thing which I am writing, which is traditional action adventure, probably not the most tricky. You might do some cool visual effects. So you're looking at your 5 panels per page. Doing it as right now, I have it just kind of roughly planned as 6 issues, but of course you can manipulate that as needed. and or even turn it into a long form story as it gets developed and as I see what it needs. But that one, I already know how it's going to end because that's what the format demands, essentially. It's and the trick of it was what kind of caused the rest of it to fall into line. Whereas with Wolf Hunter, it was a concept that led into me developing the trick later on.
Nice. Well, just to sum up for me, I do approach things in the more seat of the pants style, but I always know how it's going to end and how it's going to start. It's really odd, but I know the book ends, and I'm just filling out the middle when I write.
Yeah. And I feel like that's when you're creating a story. The more you know about your beginning and end, the easier the middle gets, because the middle's just connecting tissue. All right. Well, it is that time now, but we spent a lot of time talking about Wolf Hunter, and it is just the two of us. So, Dean, as part of your outro, tell us a little bit about Silverblade, how what it is, what's been kind of your favorite part about it so far, and where you are, and then give us your normal outro.
Sure. Silverblade is a Victorian era action adventure. It takes place in London in 1892. It's about two secret societies battling one another, a secret order of crusader monks who know the secret of why silver destroys evil beings, and then the sort of evil secret society that counters them, which is very similar to the Hellfire Club that we all know from the X-Men. And I'll leave it there because there's a lot of stuff that's revealed in that storytelling. And there's an American cavalry officer who's actually been trained by Zorro, who is in London for reasons that become evident. And he gets swept into this battle between the two secret societies. And I always wanted to answer that question about why a silver bullet and why silver weapons work against evil beings. So I decided to just expand that into a story. So I'm developing that for Silverline, and it'll be a while, but that's going to be a 4-issue then collected.
Nice.
And again, you can find me on Facebook, Dean Zachary Art. Find me on Comic Vine. Find me on Kickstarter. And obviously make mine Silverline. And as I always say, remember, creativity is beyond calculation. Don't calculate, be genuine.
All right. And I am Tim TK. I'm the associate editor at Silverline and the producer of our Wednesday show. You can find me on all the socials at Tim TK Writer. TikTok at Tim Doesn't TikTok. I haven't made content there in a while, but I might get back into it. I don't know. I've been having more fun on Instagram and Twitter. And, of course, you can find me on Twitch at AgroBacon, where I stream Destiny 2, Time is Changing. And, of course, make mine Silverline.
Excellent.
And pursue everything with creative confidence. If it's fun and it's cool to you, do it.
Amen.